SDE, NHS SDE, and he's going to be doing his presentation today on their SDE. So I'm going to put myself on mute now and pass over to Mark. You can use the chats and we can go through. If you've got any questions during, please use the chat, but then we'll answer everything at the end. Okay, thank you. Mark, over to you.
Thanks very much, and hi everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay and the slides are coming across okay. Super. I can't see you, but please shout if that's not the case. Firstly, Mark Heffernan, I work for the University Hospital Southampton in the Research and Development Department, but I have this regional role as Director of Operations for the Wessex Secure Data Environment. And so I've got about 20 minutes worth of slides to run through, maybe 25. I also saw in some of the requests that people made ahead of this session that you would be interested in a demo or seeing what the SDE looks like. So I have a demo ready to show towards the end of the session, and yes, ideally leave some time for Q&A at the end as well. So just quickly, some suggestions that I heard and received on email. How can NHS related organizations get access to the data, tools and methods used, the technical platform, principal benefits? Just interested in learning more and about how the SDE is being used, how it links with other systems, examples of automation, time and opportunities to develop intelligence and solutions, how to set up new databases at minimal cost, and how it works and how it supports research. So hopefully these slides will answer all of those questions in the demo at the end as well. So firstly, when we talk about the secure data environment, we look back a little bit in history at the NHS and thought leadership around the NHS making more use of its own data. And the Goldacre review, obviously hugely influential, 185 recommendations in that review. And I'd like to say that the majority of those being implemented now by the Secure Data Environment Network. The O'Shaughnessy review, which lamented that while plenty of academic clinical trials keep being run in the UK, commercial clinical trials aren't run as they used to, and stories for even non-interventional studies where pharma companies find it difficult to access UK data and end up going to Poland or elsewhere as a surrogate for submission to NICE and other needs they have for real-world data. So we seem to be not easy to work with in terms of industry is the message there. The Sudlow review suggested, and Kathy Sudlow's review there suggested the real power here is in linking lots of data sets together. So rather than lots of isolated secure data environments, it's the linking of lots of data together, primary care, secondary care, multimodal data that could give the real breakthrough to research. And in that review, she coined the term of HDRS, a Health Data Research Service. And so then in April this year, the government announced quite a large amount of money, £500 million from the government with £100 million from the Wellcome as well, to turbocharge medical research, in the Prime Minister's words, to bring down clinical trial recruitment time from 250 days to 150 days, for example. And that HDRS initiative will start from next April, but it's already starting to form. They're already recruiting the CEO and other important posts within that health data research service. And of course, we have the NHS 10-year plan just released as well, which calls for digitalization and also calls for things that make UK PLC attractive as well. So a huge history and mandate for change and for something like the secure data environment to come along. So if we were to summarize the SDE in a single slide, it'd be this. So on the right-hand side, whereas in the past, NHS organizations might have de-identified their data and sent it to the researcher, the Department of Health Policy wants to start to sharply reduce that data sharing. Ben Goldacre himself has an amazing story about identifying Tony Blair from just 2 points of pseudonymized data. With this old way, it was always just a trust-based system. The researcher was trusted that they would delete the data at the end of the period of time of the study. how could you ever truly de-identify genomic records and send those out? This data sharing is fraught with lots of challenges. And so the secure data environment, the idea is the NHS organization brings these data sets into a secure platform, and the researchers now come to us. They may bring their own tools, they may bring their own data, but the work they do on pseudonymized records within the secure data environment is then able to be viewed and audited and monitored by us inside these environments. They bring their own data, their own tools. They can take away result files, but they cannot take the row level data, patient level data from the system in the future. So in terms of across the country, there are actually 11 of us. There are 11 regional SDEs. I represent the Wessex SDE down at the bottom here, which is Dorset and Hampshire, Isle of Wight, a population of just under 3 million. But there are 10 other regional SDEs around the country. And we've already started to work together very closely on a number of particular studies. The idea being that any one SDE would become the lead SDE for a study and would effectively subcontract to the other SDEs to come on board with a given study, much the same way that clinical trials work with a lead site as well. There is an England SDE, but it's not the case that all of the data from the regional SDEs get sent up to the England SDE. The England SDE is there to protect national data assets that you would have heard of, like hospital episode statistics and GP prescribing and NDRS data sets like NCRAS and all those sorts of things can be accessed via the NHS England secure data environment, whereas in days gone by that would have been sent out to the researchers as well. If we look at sort of overlaying that map, so here I know it's quite small, but in red are the secure data environments, and this is really overlaying all the secure data environments with the NIHR infrastructure as well. And so you can see that there's a lot of crossover in some of these areas. In Southampton, we host some of the BRC infrastructure, for example, and the ARC. And in many parts of the country, the SDEs are tightly tied to their NIHR infrastructure as well. Lucy Chapel is on the board of the SDE right now as well. So we work very closely with our NIHR colleagues. One of the things we in Wessex have done, and several other SDEs have done this as well, is to have received delegated authority from the Health Research Authority, as long as the research that happens inside the SDE fulfills one of these 6 use cases. So we have CAG, Confidentiality Advisory Group, approval, and also REC, Research Ethics Committee approval. And we're able to delegate that to another researcher who comes to the SDE with a research request. But we have several requirements that are incumbent upon us in order to continue to exercise that delegated authority. One of them is that we need to have a data access committee that is represented by both professional members and public members as well. So we do in Wessex have a DAC. The DAC has the final say on any research going ahead. There are 6 professional members and 4 members of the public that sit on our particular DAC, and we've been up and running since March of this year. And in fact, our SDE in Wessex has been up and running since December of last year. And towards the end of this session, I'll show you some examples of the research that's already been happening in our SDE. So if you're a researcher and you have an amazing new AI algorithm you'd like to test, if you're a researcher and you want to maybe design a more effective clinical trial, or you'd like to run some feasibility for a clinical trial, if you have a general real-world study need, this could be what the FDA calls confirmatory evidence, so real-world data that might augment a control arm of a clinical trial, and other options where it replaces the control arm entirely, which is an external control arm. Those kind of real-world data studies are within the remit of the SDE. Translational research, epidemiology, and health systems research. We have some studies I'll show you later trying to improve operations within the hospital at UHS as well. So quite a large set of use cases, but hopefully this saves the researcher time. So the researcher, rather than going and getting their own HRA approval and going through the IRAS process, can come to us, and we have delegated authority to give our approval to them. We have spent a lot of time and money and efforts in engaging the public and patients absolutely as much as we could in Wessex. So it began early last year. We engaged almost 600 people. We asked some very direct questions. Do you think this is the NHS selling your data? Discuss. And they said, no, this is a great idea. The NHS should keep going. And there are details of those discussions available on our website. We then went last summer to what we called a public panel. We had 7 full-day events. We had 50 people, 25 in Dorset, 25 in Hampshire, Isle of Wight, who were selected as being demographically representative of these 2 regions. And they came together for 7 full-day events, which was fantastic. They really drove our transparency policy, how they would like to see us list our research on our website. They really drove what in their view were the strategic research priorities that we should be fulfilling. They drove how our DAC should work. So our Data Access Committee that now runs is highly informed by the public's opinion of how such a DAC should run. And it was 7 weekends in summer, which was really, really fantastic to engage at that level with those people. And we also have what we call our digital critical friends. Never sure how a friend can be critical, but these 16 members of the public are our digital critical friends, and they're wonderful. They embed in our processes. 2 of them are members of our board that meet monthly. Others are members of what we call our ambassadors group, so going out and speaking on our behalf. Others are in our data access committee, so 4 of them took up a seat on our data access committee. And whenever we have a question or something to road test, we can go to these DCFs and get their honest opinion on what we are doing. So here's just a quick glimpse of those sessions, those value-based principles, how we should prioritize resources. There is so much opportunity for research. We wanted the public to have an opinion on how we should prioritize. That data access committee process in the center there, our transparency policy and making sure everything's listed on our what we call our data use register on our website, which I'll show you a bit later. How the public considers different kinds of value, and how we should move forward with the DAC as well, were coming out of strategic priorities. So these are some core values in terms of what is the SDE here to do. These were developed together with the public. So to deliver clear, tangible benefits shared fairly and inclusively, to involve the public through all stages of the SDE as we designed the SDE, but now that we're operational also to continue to engage the public, strictly controlled access and access according to the 5 safes you've probably heard of as well. Be clear about how we're using the data and what potential benefits this bring, delivering value, respecting choices. So we have both the national opt-out and we also have our own local opt-out. That was again an HRA requirement for us. Having that delegated authority was for us to have a local opt-out a possibility as well, so people could choose to opt out nationally, but they could also choose to opt out just of the Wessex SDE if they wished. Positive industry partnerships. We know that part of what the secure data environment needs to do, and the public know that part of what we need to do is become financially self-sustaining. Therefore, we must engage with industry. We can't rely on NHS handouts or government handouts in perpetuity. Sorry, I'll just go back there. They're well aware, the public's well aware of how we need to engage with industry and want to do that in a positive way. And then governance and quality assurance as well, making sure that our governance is transparent and that we have this transparency policy there. So in terms of the priorities, what is the SDE focused on? We want to save the NHS money through prevention and long-term health improvements. So how do we allocate funds best to frontline services, improving public health and quality of life, and this idea of minority groups being disproportionately impacted by preventable disease. How can we address that using the SDE? Clear aims, measurable research, and aligning with Wessex's needs as well. So what's important to our community, generally an older population, so diseases such as dementia, Alzheimer's, cancer at the forefront of what the Wessex population asked us to focus on, and create new knowledge as well wherever possible. I can share these slides afterwards as well, but clearly costed financially self-sustaining as we talked about. deliver results with existing data and resources as well. It's always interesting, that idea of the public wanting quick results, show us things that have an immediate impact. And sometimes that's possible, and other times research is very early. Other times research needs time to perhaps bring a new molecule to market, or for the researcher to explore an idea and then follow it through further before the clinical pathway might change or policy might change. So we're trying to always balance the research in terms of what brings short-term benefits and what might take longer to realize, and promotes buy-in and advocacy from within the SDE groups as well. So maybe let me give you a very practical example of a study that's running inside the Wessex SDE. And this was a bit of research around pre-hospital audit network led by a gentleman called Phil Hyde, who's been on the BBC and elsewhere talking about this particular study. So what Phil wanted to use the secure data environment for was the ability to bring together NHS and non-NHS data sets into the secure data environment to ask questions and to do research that's never before been possible. So on the left-hand side in the blue are the NHS data sets from A&E, pre-hospital critical care, ambulance services, air ambulance, South Central Ambulance Service, etc. But also on the left-hand side are non-NHS data sets as well. So the police information about a particular accident or incident, coroner's office information, Department for Transport information as well. And because none of us give our NHS numbers to these non-NHS organizations, we needed to be able to bring in identifiable data for the purposes of linkage. Now, the researcher doesn't have access to this area. Only the Secure Data Environment Administration team has access to this part of the SDE, where we are able to use techniques to link the data together. Once the data has been linked, we then de-identify the data again, and then make it available in a separate workspace inside the SDE for the researchers to do their work. Department for Transport have already come in looking at the Prana data sets and have published already a very quick finding on how accidents have been underestimated in the past and the impact of accidents have been underestimated in the past. It's an interesting Gov UK article. I'll try to put it in the chat maybe later in this session for those who are interested. And maybe for researchers, pre-hospital care isn't their focus, so replace the left-hand side with other kinds of data that might be, primary care and secondary care data can be linked in the same way inside the SDE and made available. We have another researcher looking at overlaying air pollution data with respiratory disease diagnosis in the Southampton area and now increasingly in the Portsmouth area as well. All those big ships that dock up and continue to run their diesel engines, and the trucks that come to and from the ships as well. What about the communities that are affected by that pollution area, and what research could be done and what policy change could be affected by looking at that data? So we've got lots and lots of opportunity to take advantage of this ability to link data assets, exactly as Sudlow review suggested we should be doing. If I look across all of the data partners, all of the trusts, all of the acute and mental health and community trusts and the universities around Dorset and Hampshire and Isle of Wight, then we have University Hospital Southampton, which is the large tertiary referral centre and acute trust in the region and the host of the SDE, and all of the other trusts around as well. So it is not the case that all of these trusts just perpetually feed the SDE. It's the most common question I get is, what's in the SDE? What can I come along and start to research on? So data only moves into the SDE for an approved bit of research. We do not currently sit there and absorb data from every trust across the region every night. There'd be largely data that we probably wouldn't be useful for research in the short term, and B, it'll be very costly. Technically, we can do that. We may grow to that. But as for right now, we only bring data into the SDE on an approved study basis. So it's reactive, if you like. We go to, a researcher comes to us with a request. We go and research, do we have this prostate cancer information at UHS? We do. We build a data set at UHS. We send it to the SDE. That process is working, but it's reliant entirely on the fact that the trusts around this sort of spider's web is able to generate and send that data quickly. And many trusts we speak to say, listen, an R&D department might not have any technical resources at certain trusts. They may be entirely reliant on their BI team. And the BI team says, this looks amazing, but unfortunately I'm underwater with all of the statutory reports and the other operational dashboards I need to create for the trust. So part of what we want to do with the SDE is invest in resources, people, infrastructure at each of these trusts to be able to build up these research data marts. We know already 200 fields that most prostate researchers will want to be able to analyze by. We don't have to wait for the next request. We know what the common fields are looking at research past. And so what we want to be able to do is to build up these prostate-ready research data marts at each trust. And you might say, well, Southern and Solent, for those who are in this area, that's a community and mental health trust. Well, it may be entirely relevant that for a bit of research that someone who has had prostate cancer went on to have an episode of psychosis, or something that might have preceded their cancer might be of interest as well. So we're trying to build these sort of proactive research data marts around the region, so that when a research comes to the SDE, we can more quickly respond, more quickly answer to that research question. I actually took this from another secure data environment slide deck, but I really like it. So if on the right-hand side we're doing research, even just a hospital the size of Southampton, as big as it is, we're seeing a very, very narrow view of the patient journey. And really, for impactful research, we want to unlock the full patient journey on the left-hand side, bringing together and linking in the SDE multiple sets of data to allow the researchers to truly see the patient journey that we all go through, and how they can generate more impactful research from that. Just in terms of how researchers engage with us. So on our website, which I'll show soon, you'll see how to access the SDE. And there are really 3 steps. So the first thing is a conversation for now. We like to have a chat with the researcher. We obviously explore who they are, what organization they represent, even at this early stage, and understand what research they might like to do. I explain what the SDE is, what data it has, what data it does not have, what data it could have access to from all those source systems, from all of those trusts and other data partners as well. And if we both agree that there's something we'd like to go forward with, the second step is we have them fill in what's called a data access request form. This is a national SDE template, a form that all researchers should be filling in across the SDE network, that articulates who they are, who's funding them, why they're wanting access to the data, what specific fields they want access to. We also, at this point, can also do an initial feasibility response, which is some researchers typically say, listen, I want to understand how many non-small cell lung carcinoma patients were diagnosed between these 2 years. Can you tell me just a rough count? So rough patient counts like this, we do at this stage of the data access request form. But really that DARF becomes the basis for all the subsequent steps here. The DARF becomes the basis for how we cost up the study, because we have costs, right? The SDE has costs. We have to pay Microsoft Azure for our cloud-based infrastructure. We have to pay the salaries of those who manage the infrastructure on a daily basis, which includes data extraction people, data harmonization people, project managers, etc. So we need to understand our costs. We need to understand what this DARF means for our costs. How much will it cost to extract this data? How much will it cost to store this data? Does the researcher require some massively huge spec machine to run their new ML AI algorithm, or do they require quite a relatively small bit of infrastructure to run their research? All of these things matter, and we do this homework based on the entries in the DARF form, and we come out with an amount of funding required to go ahead with this particular research. We work with the researcher on that, and the finale of step 2, once we've reached agreement with the researcher on how this would be funded, is we go to our data access committee, and that data access committee meets monthly. They've already reviewed and made a judgment on around 7 studies at this stage over the last few months. And every month we take more and more to them. And that data access committee is the important milestone there for them to say, yes, this is a great use of resources for the SDE. yes, this benefits the patients and public of Wessex, please go ahead. Once we have DAC sign off at the end of step 2, we then give the researchers access to the environment, which I can show you in the demo. We also use a system called Edge. I'm not sure if anyone here has heard of Edge, but it's a homegrown Southampton tool. And I was told that 80% of the research in the UK runs through this Edge platform. So it's already used for managing interventional and non-interventional studies around the country. And we in the Wessex SDE use Edge to ensure that all of the proper workflows and SOPs that we've set up in the system about, okay, it's approved, who now has access? How do we check, for example, researcher passports on those users coming into the system? Have we checked that? Who has checked that? All that auditable, traceable information about setting up people in the SDE, we manage in the Edge platform. So, happy to take some questions now if that's helpful. Otherwise, happy to jump into the live demo as well. I'll just stop sharing for a second. Hopefully, you can all still hear me. Having said.
Yes, yeah, can still hear you.
Excellent.
Shall we just go into the live demo and then save the questions for the end? Unless anybody wants to stick their hand up if they've got anything so far they want to ask. I've got a couple of questions myself, but I'll save them.
Okay, no problem. All right, let me.
There is a hand up there. Goem, you've got a question?
Just one question, please. So, Mark, thanks for the presentation. How does the royalty method work, or the economic method work, when you're working with third parties in terms of sharing data for them when it's a commercial study?
Yeah, so you mentioned royalties there. So what did you mean by royalties in that case? Do you just mean commercial revenue in general?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What's the general model, if you can?
Yeah. Yeah. So when we're working with commercial parties, we have what we follow as our commercial principles for the SDE network. So broadly, the costs boil down to three areas. One is the infrastructure, which I talked about. Right? So we have to pay Microsoft Azure for the cloud infrastructure. We have to manage that cloud infrastructure as well. So there's an amount in the charge to commercial entities around the infrastructure itself, noting that we want to become financially self-sufficient. The second part of the charge to any commercial sponsor is to account for what we might call consultancy as a service. So other things we're doing beyond just landing the data in the SDE. This might be project management. This might be access to clinicians and clinical time to help them push forward their protocol or help them do the analysis. It might be analysts themselves, which is one of the things when I first met Jane and the team and talking to APHA at the Dorset DICE event. Some of those value-added services, sometimes the commercial company will say, look, I have some funds, but I don't have the technical resources to do this analysis. Could the SDE do this for us? And in Wessex, we do that. So that could be another part of the charge, is those consultancy as a service or value-added service. The final part of the charge is data as a service as well. So what does it cost us to extract the data, land the data? And inherently, there's a certain value of the data as well to these commercial sponsors. If they will use this data to be for a nice submission that will then open up a multi-billion-pound market for them, there's a certain inherent value of this data to the commercial sponsor. So it's our job within the SDE network and our commercial teams to ensure that the NHS is receiving the true value of the data, the inherent value of the data. So the infrastructure, consulting as a service, or what we call platform as a service, infrastructure, consulting as a service, and then the data charge are the three bits that make up the charge to the commercial sponsor. You use the word royalty, which is interesting as well, because one model of commercial engagement with a commercial sponsor is, if you like, an upfront payment with those three components in there. The other could be, if it's a small startup that's building IP, the other might be some sort of revenue based on future value of the organization as well. So there's a series of flexible ways that our commercial teams have in engaging with industry in this regard. So I hope that helps answer. Great. Okay, so why don't I show a demo? Because a few of you asked to see, what does an SDE actually look like? So first of all, because it's a Microsoft Azure cloud-based solution, then we access it through Windows applications. So probably you might be familiar with the Windows app. So this is a connection inside of the Windows app to the Wessex SDE environment. So you establish this connection, then click on connect. And really what it starts up is a virtual desktop. Right? So this is a desktop, an Azure virtual desktop within my desktop that runs, and this is the place where I can do all of the work. So this is the desktop, the Azure virtual desktop. I'll just maximize that. Again, inside the Azure virtual desktop, there is very little except for browser tools. And inside the browser tool, there's a URL that you can access that allows you to go to effectively the UI of our secure data environment. We use technology in Wessex from a company called BC Platforms. So it's an application layer, if you like, on top of the raw Azure environment. And it's our hope and belief that this makes it easier for the researchers to use the tools as opposed to just giving them some data in files and giving them a VM and saying, go for it. We're trying to give an extra level of service to the researchers using this BC Platforms technology, which is multimodal SDE technology. So if we look at this BC Insight, which is the main UI into the Wessex secure data environment, you can see left-hand side, right-hand side, right? Left-hand side are just options of features that you can access. You click on any one of these, you see the right-hand side. So let's start with Data Navigator. It's probably the most basic level of functionality anyone could want. The first thing you notice up the top here is this little WI workspace. So every time a researcher is in the SDE, they're actually inside a workspace inside the SDE. Now, these workspaces are study specific. Once their study has gone through all of that process I just described, that 1, 2, 3, it's been through the DAC, we've contracted with them, we create inside the SDE a workspace. And that workspace as an object has linked to it users, approved users that have gone through our approval process, and also it has linked to it data sets as well that have been approved. We apply the principle of data minimization. We've done all that homework with the data access request form. What's the minimal set of data the researcher truly requires here? And we attach those data sets or tables of data to the workspace, and we attach the users. One user could be assigned to multiple workspaces. So this is our productive environment, but I'm attached to a workspace which is simply synthetic data. So in today's demo, I am not showing you any real data. I am showing you some irritable bowel disease synthetic data. And so even I, as the director of ops, only have access to that one synthetic data workspace. I do not want or need access to the real workspaces of all the real research that's going on in the SDE. So we're in a workspace. And because we're in a workspace, I'm seeing only certain data sets. And you can see here that I can see information on a diagnosis information, for example, and I can show extra columns about Paris diagnosis and extent and other things. All of these fields would have been agreed up front with the researcher as part of that DAF approval process. There's a subject ID. This would be an anonymized ID or a pseudonym. Here, obviously not any medical record numbers or NHS numbers shown within the SDE. And I could look at the same for drug usage and all sorts of other things about these IBD patients. I can filter, I can drill down, I can do all these things inside here. So very much like Excel, very basic functionality that we feel every researcher would be able to do. The next level of functionality is a bit like a Power BI dashboard. So it allows you as a researcher to be able to explore different queries as well. So as a researcher, you can create a new cohort here and explore a little bit based on those fields in the tables, certain filters. So only show me patients who have been diagnosed with, for example, Crohn's disease, and include that and add that to the group. And then only show me those who had a certain pathology or certain surgery and certain intervention. And I can run this then, and the cohort of 2,000 changes down to 1,247. And I can add a visualization here and lots of choice about the visualizations that I can do. So I can start to build up my own little dashboard And in each dashboard, there can be these widgets. I'll show you a quick example here. So there's age of diagnosis, that's a box plot of age of diagnosis by ethnicity. These are the sorts of things that users can hopefully create themselves very quickly and just self-serve. They're just exploring the data and building images. This image is an example of a result file that could leave the SDE, but the row level data we were looking at, the data navigator, is an example of what could not leave the SDE. We also, because it's a multimodal SDE, we also have other tools, like we can support Nextflow as well, which is an increasingly popular way of researchers writing scripts. We also have things like genome-wide association. So because our SDE can sustain both clinical data and genomic data and image data, thus being multimodal, we might have researchers who understand what GWAS is, but don't know how to code a genome-wide association study. So we embed some Plink algorithms here as well to make it easy for the researcher to explore and say, there are no genomic data sets in this demo environment, but we could have genomic data here selected, cases and controls, because GWAS works on comparing cases and controls, and other information about the variants or filtering on certain chromosomes, and principal component analysis is a prerequisite, and maximum allele frequencies, and all these sorts of things could be set up and run as well by the researcher. So again, trying to appeal to researchers who know what GWAS is, but don't code. And then ultimately you get the researcher who said, listen, just give me the code, which is fine. So we embed Jupyter notebooks inside of the Wessex SDE as well. Within Jupyter notebooks, you can run Python, Julia, or R. We can also launch RStudio. You can also go to the command line as well. So you can go down to terminal level. And this, either here at the terminal level or in Nextflow, would be the way that we could run Docker images. So sometimes things like Regini and MATLAB and other sorts of analytical tools like this, they're not actually available necessarily in Python or R. And so we allow the researchers to be able to bring in their own analytical packages or tools. If it's a licensed product, we have a conversation with them about transferring the license into the SDE. But if it's something else like a Docker image of their own analytical tools, we do allow those to come into the SDE, but we have an ingress, egress, airlock process where we check any package coming in. Because this is inside the SDE, there's no self-service here from the internet. If you know Python, you know there's pip install. So pip install will not work from inside of the SDE. Downloading from an R CRAN mirror will not work from inside the SDE. So as part of the setting up of the project and in setting up the workspace, we talk to the researcher about what packages they might need, or what latest version of this Python package or everything. The system comes preloaded with a range of different packages in it, but we have a way to bring in other packages on a per study basis as well. So let me just give you an example of this will do. Give you an example of a Python package here. So all of these packages are already preloaded into the SDE. You can see that inside of here, we have a way to read data from a data set. So when I showed you the data navigator earlier, we're just doing select star from a data set. And then once you've got it into a Python data frame, then off you go doing whatever kind of visualizations that you might like to do. Once the researcher has done their visualizations and done their analytical output with whatever tool they've chosen, then these result files come in here for approval. Right now, it's very much a manual process in the Wessex SDE to look through those result files and make sure that they truly are a result file. Sometimes in the case of rare diseases, we've had conversations about the nature and the patient count in those result files, and gone back to the Data Access Committee within UHS as well for that. So there is a lot of checks here in terms of the result files before we let anything escape the SDE. Right now, they're all manual. There is something interesting, a project called SACRO, S-A-C-R-O. I believe it's a DARE UK project, semi-automated checking of result output. And we're looking at that as well as a way to try to semi-automate this process. But for now, we review everything before we allow it to leave. And that Department for Transport study I mentioned, that Gov UK, involved some result files leaving the SDE, which were judged by our SOP and our administrative staff to be fine in result files. So user can bring in any package they like. User can run tools like Python, R, or even command line and Nextflow. User produces result files and then puts them here ready for export. We have another tool called ArcQuest, which allows us to do feasibility queries in a federated fashion, so we don't have to move the data around. But I might hold on that one. Hopefully that little demo has given you a taste of what's inside the SDE for Wessex. I know we're running out of time, but I had one last thing on my slide deck. Sorry if I come back here. Which is, I'll just stop sharing there again, 1 second. Go like that, and there. So maybe just 2 minutes more on some of the use cases, because some of you asked, okay, what's running in the SDE? What are you doing with the SDE? So in terms of use cases of what's out there, we make this public, again, part of our transparency policy. And if I show you our Wessex SDE here, we have our data use register. So part of our transparency policy is talking about all of the studies we're doing in the SDE. I might just pick out a few of these rather than go through them all. Let me pick out maybe, yeah, okay. So this one here, this rare disease study, this was actually for a commercial sponsor. It's a rare disease called WAIHA, warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia. So the commercial sponsor had a molecule. They wanted to take it through FDA submission, and they needed real-world data to produce what the FDA calls confirmatory evidence. And the Wessex SDE was used as part of that study as well. The company involved, or the data intermediary involved, was a company called BC Platforms, who have technology but also act as this sort of mini CRO, like a mini IQVIA. And so we did a study around that rare disease, which we're very proud of. It involved extracting unstructured data from charts and also structured data, landing it in the SDE so that BC Platforms and their sponsor are able to run the analysis. We have the CARD study as well, so computed assisted risk of deterioration score, acting as an early warning score for UK hospitals, currently running on University Hospital Southampton data, but could be an example of something that goes across the SDE network as well. And the research are currently looking at that. The Data Sustains Live, I referenced that Department for Transport work. So Data Sustains Life and also the LPHD, linking police and health data on road collisions, was the origin of that work. So looking at the Department for Transport analysis on that Prana data set was also done there. Again, fourth, as a hospital operations optimization type of piece of work was done there as well. CatchNet, I mean, there's lots of examples here, and we're adding to this all the time. As the SDE is used for studies, we add it to our data use register. We're also about to add what's called a data capability register. So the data capability register will be studies that we've done in the past that could be used for other researchers in future, or even the source systems we have access to will be listed in that data capability register going forward as well. We're on about 10 studies right now in the SDE. We want to get to 30 studies by the end of March, so we're growing very quickly. And there's certainly a lot of interest in our pipeline for using the SDE. So I hope that's been helpful. Hopefully I covered all the things that people wanted to hear about the SDE, and happy to stay for questions.
Thank you, Mark. So as I said before, the recording will be saved on the AphA website, and you said you'll also share the slides, Mark, so we'll put those on there as well, because there's so much information to take in. It's explained a couple of things, or unexplained a couple of things for me with my understanding of SDEs, which is good. It's all learning. Just one of the things that I noticed, all the, your data marts, so that's kind of like the standard offering of what you've got in the SDE. There's so much talk at the moment in population health prevention and precision medicine. I saw you mention genomics a couple of times. Where does genomics data come from? Is that held as part of the SDE? Because if we start doing precision medicine on the population health side, is that something that's in there? Because it sounds like your customers use the data you've got and then bring in the rest of the stuff themselves that they need to build up the entire picture. So
that's a great question. Yeah. So I can speak for, again, just our area of the country. So for University Hospital Southampton, when patients are genetically tested, their data ends up being in fundamentally one of two places. One is in Birmingham. There's something called Birmingham Women's and Children's, which does the genetic testing for a lot of trusts around our region. And the other is Genomics England as well, which does testing for some of our UHS patients as well. So we've actually been working on studies that allow us to bring that UHS patient data back into the UH servers and then potentially make it available for inside the Wessex SDE. So we know our SDE is capable of handling genomic data. There is no study right now making use of genomic data inside the SDE. But if you like, we've opened up those bridges to Genomics England and started to talk to them about how we would get our data back, and also Birmingham Women's and Children's as well. We've been able to progress that link back from Birmingham Women's and Children's a little bit more, because the UHS patient genomic data in our case sits in other places. We need firstly a way to be able to bring it back and then take it forward. Maybe it's not a level of detail. In the Birmingham Women's and Children's genomic data, it actually comes back and goes through a variant annotation pipeline. So we look at the genetic variants, and then we are wanting to combine those genetic variants with the clinical data in the UHS side so that we can do feasibility queries in the first level, but then also enable research that's looking at that personalized medicine as well. So, researchers and increasingly industry researchers, where they have a molecule that might be targeted at a certain genetic mutation, want to ask us not just, do you have any non-small cell lung carcinoma patients, but ask us, do you have any NSCLC patients who have an EGFR mutation like this, or another kind of cancer with a HER2 mutation like that? So for us, it's about enabling those feasibility queries, understanding all of the genomic data, enabling feasibility queries so it can do basic counts, but then moving that genomic information with the clinical data into the SDE so that people can start to explore that data. That's the next horizon for us. So we've got a number of studies in our pipeline that need to do exactly that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for anyone before I come up with my next question? Giving you all a chance. Okay, just another quick question. Obviously, like you say, you have to be self-sustaining. You need to get revenue from this to exist. So a lot of your customers, there's always that big question that the general public have this issue about data being sold to big pharma. And so, but you've obviously engaged the public a lot in setting it up. Did you have all those issues and overcome them easily, or?
Yeah. So we definitely raised this with the members of the public in terms of engaging with industry. They realize we must because of the financial self-sustainability angle, but they gave us some great guardrails about how and what kind of companies as well. So a couple of things about that. We have inside UHS our own user and organization validation service that we run today. What kind of company is this? Who's the real funder behind this? Where is this money coming from? But we are moving nationally to an SDE network-wide user and org validation process. So there'll be a central place where organizations can be vetted, and users from those organizations can be vetted before any of the SDEs allow research on them. And even before we accept an inquiry from them or a data access request form from them. So the user and org validation service is one way that the public said, okay, this is going to be checked that, for example, companies linked with the tobacco industry, companies linked with manufacturers of weapons, or companies from certain countries as well, are all not going to pass our user and org validation process. That gave the public some hope. The second thing the public gave us in terms of guardrails was that data was never to leave the SDE to go to one of these commercial organizations. So that's good, because that's our security by design, that those companies come to us, they can bring their own tools. If they want to bring their own commercial data from other trials, they can, but invariably they have their own rules about moving their own trial data around. But they come to us, they do the work with us, they take only result files that help the public as well. The other thing that we talked about with the public as well is, if in a future SDE use case there was an opportunity to use the SDE to find potential recruits for a trial, for a clinical trial. And that is within our sights for future as well, is that we could start to use the SDE for clinical trial recruitment cases, not just clinical trial design cases. And speaking to the HRA about this as well, a couple of things became clear. That re-ID process should happen outside of the SDE. So that edge system I talked about already enables re-ID and keeps a record of pseudonym and original ID for interventional studies and non-interventional studies. So we'd use that same approach of re-IDing outside the SDE. But most important to the public was that the industry researcher never contacts an individual about that clinical trial recruitment, that the only contact to an individual is through the clinical care team, whether at the hospital or at the GP. And that's something we absolutely plan to adhere to as well, to give the public that assurity that they're not going to get a call from some large pharma company inviting them to a trial. That kind of information, that kind of access, that kind of process will only happen via a clinical care team person. That's another guardrail they gave us. So yes, we need to work with industry. The UK NHS long-term strategy now encourages us to work with industry. The O'Shaughnessy report encourages us to work with industry, but we need to do so in those guardrails that the public's given us. So.
Okay, thank you. I can just see Alex has put his hand up there with a question.
Hey, Mark, thanks very much for talking us through that. It's genuinely been really, really useful. I've got two questions, but I'm going to predicate with the fact that I did have to step away for 10 minutes while I warmed up my lunch. So I may have missed a bit, and feel free to point me back to the recording. I'll happily go back and watch it. But there's two things I've been thinking about. Viabilities of research projects. I've had a lot of the time where people will, previously pharmaceutical companies will say, hey, well, what data do you have? And I say, well, what do you want to do? And they say, well, tell me what you've got and I'll tell you what we want to do. Mm-hmm. And how you may have navigated through that, because my experience is that the data and analytics functions at organizations are the specialists in kind of making data fit to the problem that people are trying to look at. Yeah. And the second one, with 2 minutes left as well, how did you navigate the politics of a regional SDE and people, particularly bigger organizations, going, well, we've got our own version, you've got your own version over there, why should we contribute to yours?
It's two great questions. I'll try to answer them in probably what's left is 90 seconds. So yeah, there's a little bit of, with any industry partner, there's a little bit of what have you got? Tell me what you've got, and back and forth like that. I think we have tried to encourage people who are ex-industry to work with us as well. So inside our SDE teams, we have some people who are familiar with those kind of approaches. For us, it's the data access request form. We insist that people, and I don't know if you were at that part of the demo or the presentation, but we insist that pharma companies fill in a data access request form so they can be very clear on their needs to us. It's part of our process, it's a mandated part of our process. And that's where we get to explore in more detail with them what they truly need, as opposed to us sharing what we have. Because as you say, or probably where your question was going is, what we have is actually quite interesting and valuable commercially already. Like the knowledge of what we have, the data dictionary of what we have actually has commercial value. So for us, the DAF is what encourages the commercial companies to be absolutely clear about the fields that they want or need. In terms of the politics within the region, I guess that's why it wasn't a national initiative, that they encouraged us to have 11 separate political discussions as opposed to one big messy one. And so for in our region, for example, and maybe we're lucky, but all of the trusts in our region have signed what's called a data sharing agreement. So they've agreed that there's value in them sharing the data. We've had a conversation about value return to them as well. Is it a portion of the commercial value returning to the trust? Is it the fact that we're enabling them to have their own research data marts for their own academic purposes? Is it tools and people that we can give them that help increase the quality of their data for research? All of these things return value to the contributing organizations, and we've tried to have conversations with them along those lines and been successful in doing so. I know in other regions the politics are different, but in our region that's how it's gone so far.
Thank you, Mark.
Super.
Lovely. Dead on 1 o'clock.
Thanks very much, Jane, for the opportunity to present.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming, and the recording and slides will be available on the AphA website. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.